As I mentioned earlier, HTML is a markup language. This means that HTML uses tags to format the content of the page. Once you're comfortable with the syntax behind formatting content, then it simply becomes a matter of learning which tags are available to you for formatting and the options you have when using them. To illustrate that concept a little bit more clearly, I'm going to be using the format.html file that you see here. So you can see here within the body of our page, we just have a single line of text that says, "What am I?" Well, currently that line's not being formatted at all. It has no tag around it to identify it other than belonging to the body of the page. Now, if I were to preview this in a browser, you can see that it does display on the page as just a single line of text, and it sort of has the default font size and formatting that you would expect to find in just regular paragraph text. So the browser is basically just giving you the default formatting for text within the browser. However, if I go back into the code, I can change the formatting of this text by simply applying another tag around it. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So right around "What am I?" I'm just going to go ahead and create a new tag. I'm going to use a pre-tag. Now, I don't think we've seen this one so far in the title. We will be seeing this a little bit later on as well. So again, I'm just going to do an opening and a closing tag that wrap around the text, "What am I?" I'm going to go ahead and save this. If I go back into my browser and refresh my page, I can see that the text does indeed change formatting. Just because you're changing formatting doesn't mean that everything that we do in HTML is presentational. It's actually the other way around. HTML describes the structure of the document. So essentially, pre, which stands for pre-formatted, you're telling the browser this is pre-formatted text. Every single browser out there has what we call a default style sheet. Now, what that means is basically there's a little style sheet that says, okay, what type of element is that? This is how I'm going to format and display that on the page. Now, using your own styles, you can override those, and we'll do that a little bit later on in this title. But for the most part, the formatting that we're seeing on the page is actually representative of what type of element it is. You can see pre-formatted text, for example, is typically displayed in a monospaced font. And the reason for that is because that pre-tag is used a lot around code snippets or code segments or things like that. So monospaced fonts are typically really good for that. Of course, you can use CSS to style it any way that you want. So if I go back in and I change the tag that's around it, I'm going to dramatically change the meaning of the text. So right now it's pre-formatted text, but if I surround this with, say, an H4, which is a heading 4, and save that and test it, I can see again the text changes. It's bigger, it's bolder, it's now a heading. I notice that it's not that large because it's a heading 4. If, on the other hand, I change that to a H1, which is a top-level heading, save that and test it, you can see the text gets a lot larger. Again, the browser is simply giving you a visual representation of what type of element that is. We're not actually passing any formatting instructions whatsoever. So for the most part, when you apply a tag around text to create an element, you're essentially telling the browser or whatever user agent is parsing that page what type of semantic structural element it is. Now, it's not always so cut and dried in terms of being structural versus presentational. Let me show you what I mean. Well, let's go back into our code, back into our heading 1. What about the text am? What if I wanted to change that and italicize that or make it appear italicized within the heading? It's very easy for me to do by just using the I tag or the italics tag. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap the word am, an italics tag. And of course, it's okay to nest one tag inside of another. So if I save this, go back in and preview my page, I can see that now the word am is indeed italicized. The italics tag, along with tags like the bold tags, are a small section of tags within HTML that are entirely presentational. And what that means is they don't actually mean anything. We didn't change the meaning of this text at all. We just informed the browser to go ahead and display that text as being italicized. There's a big movement among web designers and developers over, say, the last 5 to 10 years, to be honest with you, to separate presentation from structure. And what that means is the goal is to just have your code represent the structure of the text, what type of element this is, and then you allow CSS, which is a presentational language, to control how it looks. But there are still some remnants of presentational markup in HTML, and the italics tag is one of them. When would you use it? Well, for a case just like this, when I wanted to italicize that text but not necessarily affect its meaning. Again, as I mentioned, that's not always cut and dry because there are other tags out there that seemingly do the same thing. Let's say, for example, I use the em tag, em, instead of the italics tag. If I saved this and previewed it, nothing changes. It's still italicized. However, behind the scenes, there's actually a much bigger change. The M tag stands for emphasis. So now the word am is being emphasized, whereas before it was merely being italicized. And we're going to explain this a little bit later on in this chapter as we talk about emphasizing text and what the difference is between some of these presentational versus structural elements are. That's why it's so important to understand what these tags are and what they're doing and what they're saying about the underlying text. As a markup language, all you really need to do to properly format content in HTML is to simply wrap it in the appropriate tag. Of course, this means that part of the joy of learning HTML is learning all of the different tags and when they're appropriate.